Nope. Check, check, check.
Check. Hello, hello, hello. It's the right book. Chapter 10. The Times. Power of the newspaper is familiar in America and in accordance with our political system. In England, it stands in antagonism with the feudal institutions, and it is all the more beneficent succor against the secretive tendencies of a monarchy. The celebrated Lord Somers knew of no good law proposed and passed in his time to which the public papers had not directed his attention. There is no corner and no night. A relentless inquisition drags every secret to the day, turns the glare of this solar microscope on every malfeasance, so as to make the public a more terrible spy than any foreigner, and no weakness can be taken advantage of by an enemy, since the whole people are already forewarned. Thus England rids herself of those incrustations which have been the ruin of old states. Of course, this inspection is feared. No antique privilege, no comfortable monopoly, but sees surely that its days are counted. The people are familiarized with the reason of reform, and one by one take away every argument of the obstructives. Quote, "So your grace likes the comfort of reading the newspapers," said Lord Mansfield to the Duke of Northumberland. "Mark my words, you and I shall not live to see it, but this young gentleman, Lord Eldon, may, or it may be a little later, but a little sooner or later these newspapers will most assuredly write the Dukes of Northumberland out of their titles and possessions, and the country out of its king." The tendency in England towards social and political institutions like those of America is inevitable, and the ability of its journals is the driving force. England is full of manly, clever, well-bred men who possess the talent of writing offhand, pungent paragraphs expressing with clearness and courage their opinion of any person or performance. Valuable or not, it is a skill that is rarely found out of the English journals. The English do this as they write poetry, as they ride and box. By being educated to it. Hundreds of clever parades and frays and frauds and hoods and hooks and magins and mills and macaulays make poems or short essays for a journal, as they make speeches in Parliament and on the hustings, or as they shoot and ride. It is a quite accidental and arbitrary direction of their general ability, rude health and spirits. An Oxford education and the habits of society are implied, but not a ray of genius. It comes of the crowded state of the professions, the violent interest which all men take in politics, the family of experimenting in journals and high pay. The most conspicuous result of this talent is the Times newspaper. No power in England is more felt, more feared, or more obeyed. What you read in the morning in that journal you shall hear in the evening in all society. It has ears everywhere, and its information is earliest, completest, and surest. It has risen year by year, and victory by victory, to its present authority. I asked one of its old contributors whether it had once been abler than it is now. Never, he said. These are its palmiest days. It has shown those qualities which are dear to Englishmen, unflinching adherence to its objects, prodigal intellectual ability, and a towering assurance backed by the perfect organization in its printing house and its worldwide network of correspondence and reports. It has its own history and famous trophies. In 1820, it adopted the cause of Queen Caroline and carried it against the king. It adopted a poor law system and almost alone lifted it through. When Lord Brougham was in power, it decided against him and pulled him down. It declared war against Ireland and conquered it. It adopted the League against the Corn Laws, and when Cobden had begun to despair, it announced his triumph. It denounced and discredited the French Republic of 1848 and checked every sympathy with it in England until it had enrolled 200,000 special constables to watch the Chartists and make them ridiculous on the 10th April. It first denounced them and then adopted the new French Empire and urged the French alliance and its results. It has entered into each municipal, literary, and social question almost with a controlling voice. It has done bold and seasonable service in exposing frauds which threatened the commercial community. Meantime, it attacks its rivals by perfecting its printing machinery and will drive them out of circulation. But the only limit to the circulation of the Times is the impossibility of printing copies fast enough, since a daily paper can only be new and seasonable for a few hours. It will kill all but that paper which is diametrically in opposition, since many papers, first and last, have lived by their attacks on the leading journal. The late Mr. Walter was printer of the Times, and had gradually arranged the whole material of it in perfect system. It is told that when he demanded a small share in the proprietary, he was refused. He said, quote, "As you please, gentlemen, and you may take away Times from this office when you will. I shall publish the New Times next Monday morning." The proprietors, who had already complained that his charges for printing were excessive, found that they were in his power and gave him whatever he wished. I went one day with a good friend to the Times office, which was entered through a pretty garden yard in Printing House Square. We walked with some circumspection, as if we were entering a powder mill, but the door was opened by a mild old woman, and by dint of some transmission of cards, we were at last conducted into the parlor of Mr. Morris, a very gentle person, with no hostile appearances. The statistics are now quite out of date, but I remember he told us that the daily printing was then 35,000 copies, that on the 1st March 1848, the greatest number ever printed, 54,000, were issued. That since February, the daily circulation had increased by 8,000 copies. The old press they were, then using printed 5 or 6,000 sheets per hour. The new machine, for which they were then building an engine, would print 12,000 per hour. Our entertainer confided us to a courteous assistant to show us the establishment, in which I think they employed 120 men. I remember I saw the reporter's room, in which they redacted their hasty stenographs, but the editor's room, and who is in it, I did not see, though I shared the curiosity of mankind respecting it. The staff of the Times has always been made up of able men: old Walter, Sterling, Bacon, Barnes, Alsager, Horace Twiss, Jones Lloyd, John Oxford, Mr. Mosley, Mr. Bailey, have contributed to its renown in their special departments, but it has never wanted the first pins for occasional assistance. Its private information is inexplicable and recalls the stories of Fauche's police, whose omniscience made it believe that the Empress Josephine must be in his pay. It has mercantile and political correspondence in every foreign city, and its expresses outrun the dispatches of the government. One hears anecdotes of the rise of its servants, as of the functionaries of the India House. I was told of the dexterity of one of its reporters who, finding himself on one occasion where the magistrates had strictly forbidden reporters, put his hands into his coat pocket, and with pencil in one hand and tablet in the other, did his work. The influence of this journal is a recognized power in Europe, and of course none is more conscious of it than its conductors. The tone of its articles has often been the occasion of comment from the official organs of the continental courts, and sometimes the ground of diplomatic complaint. Quote, "What would the Times say is a terror in Paris and Berlin, in Vienna, in Copenhagen, and in Nepal. Its consummate discretion and success exhibit the English skill of combination. The daily paper is the work of many hands, chiefly, it is said, of young men recently from the university, and perhaps reading law in chambers in London. Hence the academic elegance and classic illusion which adorns its columns. Hence, too, the heat and gallantry of its onset. But the steadiness of the aim suggests the belief that this fire is directed and fed by older engineers, as if persons of exact information and with settled views of policy supplied the writers with the basis of fact and the object to be attained, and availed themselves of their younger energy and eloquence to plead the cause. Both the council and the executive departments gain by this division. Of two men, one equal ability, the one who does not write but keeps his eye on the course of public affairs, will have the higher judicial wisdom. But the parts are kept in concert. All the articles appear to proceed from a single will. The Times never disapproves of what itself has said, or cripples itself by apology for the absence of the editor or the indiscretion of him who held the pen. It speaks out bluff and bold, and sticks to what it says. It draws from any number of learned and skillful contributors. But a more learned and skillful person supervises, corrects, and coordinates. Of this closet the secret does not transpire. No writer is suffered to claim the authorship of any paper. Everything good, from whatever quarter, comes out editorially, And thus, by making the paper everything, and those who write it nothing, the character and the awe of the journal gain. The English like it for its complete information. The statement of fact in the Times is as reliable as a citation from Hansard. Then they like its independence. They do not know, when they take it up, what their paper is going to say. But above all, for the nationality and confidence of its tone, it thinks for them all. It is their understanding and day's ideal daguerreotyped. When I see them reading its columns, they seem to me becoming every moment more British. It has the national courage, not rash and petulant, but considerate and determined. No dignity or wealth is a shield from its assault. It attacks a duke as readily as a policeman, and with the most provoking airs of condescension. It makes rude work of the Board of Admiralty. The bench of bishops is still less safe. One bishop fares badly for his rapacity, and another for his bigotry, and a third for his courtliness. It addresses occasionally a hint of majesty itself to majesty itself, and sometimes a hint which is taken. There's an air of freedom even in their advertising columns, which speaks well for England to a foreigner. On the days when I arrived in London in 1847, I read among the daily announcements one offering a reward of £50 to any person who would put a nobleman, described by name and title, late a member of Parliament, into any county jail in England, he having been convicted of obtaining money under false pretenses. It was never such arrogancy as the tone of this paper. Every slip of Oxonian and Cantabrigian who writes his first letter assumes that we subdued the earth before we sat down to write this particular Times. One would think the world was on its knees to the Times office for its daily breakfast, but this arrogance is calculated. Who would care for it if it, quote, surmised, or, quote, dared to confess, or, quote, ventured to predict, etc.? No. It is so, and so it shall be. The morality and patriotism of the Times claim only to be representative, and by no means ideal. It gives the argument not of the majority, but of the commanding class. Its editors know better than to defend Russia or Austria or English vested rights on abstract grounds. But they give a voice to the class who, at the moment, take the lead. And they have an instinct for finding where the power now lies, which is eternally shifting its banks, sympathizing with and speaking for the class that rules the hour, yet being apprised of every groundswell, every Chartist resolution, every church squabble, every strike in the mills. They detect the first tremblings of change. They watch the hard and bitter struggles of the authors of each liberal movement year by year, watching them only to taunt and obstruct them, until at last, when they see that these have established their fact, that power is on the point of passing to them, they strike in with the voice of a monarch, astonish those whom they succor as much as those whom they desert, and make victory sure. Of course, the aspirants see that the Times is one of the goods of fortune, not to be won but by winning their cause. Punch is equally an expression of English good sense as the London Times. It is the comic version of the same sense. Many of its caricatures are equal to the best pamphlets and will convey to the eye in an instant the popular view which was taken of each turn of public affairs. Its sketches are usually made by masterly hands and sometimes with genius, the delight of every class, because uniformly guided by that taste which is tyrannical in England. It is a new trait of the 19th century that the wit and humor of England, as in Punch, so in the humorists Gerald, Dickens, Thackeray, Hood, have taken the direction of humanity and freedom. The Times, like every important institution, shows the way to a better. It is a living index of the colossal British power. Its existence honors the people who dare to print all they know, dare to know all the facts, and do not wish to be flattered by hiding the extent of the public disaster. There is always safety in valor. I wish I could add that this journal aspired to deserve the power it wields by guidance of the public sentiment to the right. It is usually pretended in Parliament and elsewhere that the English press has a high tone, which it has not. It has an imperial tone, as of a powerful and independent nation. But as with other empires, its tone is prone to be official and even officinal. The Times shares all the limitations of the governing classes and wishes never to be in a minority. If only it dared to cleave to the right, to show the right to be the only expedient, and feed its batteries from the central heart of humanity, it might not have so many men of rank among its contributors, but genius would be its cordial and invincible ally. It might now and then bear the brunt of formidable combinations, but no journal is ruined by wise courage. It would be the natural leader of British reform, its proud function, that of being the voice of Europe, the defender of the exile and patriot against despots, would be more effectually discharged. It would have the authority which is claimed for that dream of good men not yet come to pass, an international congress. And the least of its victories would be to give to England a new millennium of beneficent power. Chapter 16, Stonehenge. It had been agreed between my friend, Mr. Carlyle, and me that before I left England, we should make an excursion together to Stonehenge, which neither of us had seen, and the project pleased my fancy, with the double attraction of the monument and the companion. It seemed a bringing together of extreme points to visit the oldest religious monument in Britain in company with her latest thinker, and one whose influence may be traced in every contemporary book. I was glad to sum up a little my experiences and to exchange a few reasonable words on the aspects of England with a man on whose genius I set a very high value, and who had as much penetration and as severe a theory of duty as any person in it. On Friday, 7th July, we took the South-Western Railway through Hampshire to Salisbury, where we found a carriage to convey us to Amesbury. The fine weather and my friend's local knowledge of Hampshire, in which he is wont to spend a part of every summer, made the way short. There was much to say, too, of the traveling Americans and their usual objects in London. I thought it natural that they should give some time to works of art collected here, which they cannot find at home, and a little to scientific clubs and museums, which, at this moment, make London very attractive. But my philosopher was not contented. Art, and high art, is a favorite target for his wit. Yes, Kunst is a great delusion, and Goethe and Schiller wasted a great deal of good time on it. And he thinks he discovers that old Goethe found this out, and in his later writings, changed his tone. As soon as men begin to talk of art, architecture, antiquities, nothing good comes of it. He wishes to go through the British Museum in silence, and thinks a sincere man will see something and say nothing. These days, he thought it would become an architect to consult only the grim necessity and say, I can build you a coffin for such dead persons as you are, and for such dead purposes as you have, but you shall have no ornament. For the science, he had, if possible, even less tolerance, and compared the savants of Somerset House to the boy who asked Confucius how many stars in the sky. Confucius replied, he minded things near him. Then said the boy, how many hairs are in your eyebrows? Confucius said he didn't know and didn't care. Still speaking of the Americans, Carlyle complained that they dislike the coldness and exclusiveness of the English and run away to France and go with their countrymen and are amused instead of manfully staying in London and confronting Englishmen and acquiring their culture, who really have much to teach them. I told Carlyle that I was easily dazzled and was accustomed to concede readily all that an Englishman would ask. I saw everywhere in the country proofs of sense and spirit, and success of every sort. I like the people. They are as good as they are handsome. They have everything and can do everything. But meantime, I surely know that as soon as I return to Massachusetts, I shall lapse at once into the feeling, which the geography of America inevitably inspires, that we play the game with immense advantage. But there, and not here, is the seat and center of the British race, and that no skill or activity can long compete with the prodigious natural advantages of that country in the hands of the same race, and that England, an old and exhausted island, must one day be contented, like other parents, to be strong only in her children. But this was a proposition which no Englishman of whatever condition can easily entertain. We left the train at Salisbury and took a carriage to Amesbury, passing by Old Sarum, a bare treeless hill once containing the town which sent 2 members to Parliament, now not a hut, and arriving at Amesbury, stopped at the George Inn. After dinner, we walked to Salisbury Plain. On the broad downs under the grey sky, not a house was visible, nothing but Stonehenge, which looked like a group of brown dwarfs in the wide expanse. Stonehenge and the barrows, which rose like green bosses about the plain, and a few hayricks. On the top of a mountain, the old temple would not be more impressive. Far and wide, a few shepherds with their flocks sprinkled the plain, and a bagman drove along the road. It looked as if the wide margin given in this crowded aisle to this primeval temple were accorded by the veneration of the British race to the old egg out of which all their ecclesiastical structures and history had proceeded. Stonehenge is a circular colonnade with a diameter of 100 feet and enclosing a second and a third colonnade within. We walked around the stones and clambered over them to wont ourselves with their strange aspect and groupings, and found a nook sheltered from the wind among them, where Carlyle lighted his cigar. It was pleasant to see that just this simplest of all simple structures, 2 upright stones and a lintel laid across, had long outstood all later churches and all history, and were like what is most permanent on the face of the planet. These and the barrows, mere mounds, of which there are 160 within a circle of 3 miles about Stonehenge. Like the same mound on the plain of Troy, which still makes good to the passing mariner on Hellespont, the vaunt of Homer and the fame of Achilles. Within the enclosure grow buttercups, nettles, and all around wild thyme, daisy, meadowsweet, goldenrod, thistle, and the carpeting grass. Over us, larks were soaring and singing, as my friend said, the larks which were hatched last year, and the wind which was hatched many thousand years ago. We counted and measured by paces the biggest stones, and soon knew as much as any man can suddenly know of the inscrutable temple. There are 94 stones, and there were once probably 160. The temple is circular and uncovered, and the situation fixed astronomically. The grand entrances here and at Avebury being placed exactly northeast, quote, as all the gates of the old cavern temples are. How come the stones here? For these sarsens or druidical sandstones are not found in this neighborhood. The sacrificial stone, as it is called, is the only one in all these blocks that can resist the action of fire, and as I read in the books, must have been brought 150 miles. On almost every stone we found the marks of the mineralogist's hammer and chisel. The 19 smaller stones of the inner circle are of granite. I, who had just come from Professor Sedgwick's Cambridge Museum of Megatheria and Mastodons, was ready to maintain that some cleverer elephants or Milodonta had borne off and laid these rocks, one on another. Only the good beasts must have known how to cut a well-wrought tenon and mortise, and to smooth the surface of some of the stones. The chief mystery is that any mystery should have been allowed to settle on so remarkable a monument in a country on which all the muses have kept their eyes now for 1,800 years. We are not yet too late to learn much more than is known of this structure. Some diligent fellows or Layard will arrive stone by stone at the whole history by that exhaustive British sense in perseverance, so whimsical in its choice of objects, which leaves its own Stonehenge or choir gower to the rabbits, whilst it opens pyramids and uncovers Nineveh. Stonehenge, in virtue of the simplicity of its plan and its good preservation, is as if new and recent. And 1,000 years hence, men will thank this age for the accurate history. We walked in and out and took again and again a fresh look at the uncanny stones. The old Sphinx put our petty differences of nationality out of sight. To these conscious stones, we two pilgrims were alike, known and near. We could equally well revere their old British meaning. My philosopher was subdued and gentle. In this quiet house of destiny, he happens to say, I plant cypresses wherever I go, and if I am in search of pain, I cannot go wrong. The spot, the gray blocks, and their rude order, which refuses to be disposed of, suggested to him the flight of ages and the succession of religions. The old times of England impress Carlyle much. He reads little, he says, in the last years, but Acta Sanctorum, the 53 volumes of which are in the London Library. He finds all English history therein. You can see, as he reads, the old saint of Iona sitting there and writing, a man to men. The Acta Sanctorum show plainly that the men of those times believed in God and in the immortality of the soul, as their abbeys and cathedrals testify. Now, even the Puritanism is all gone. London is pagan. He fancied that greater men had lived in England than any of her writers, and in fact, about the time when those writers appeared, the last of these were already gone. We left the mound in the twilight, with design to return the next morning and come back 2 miles in our inn. And coming back 2 miles to our inn, we were met by little showers, and late as it was, men and women were out attempting to protect their spread windows. The grass grows rank and dark in the showery England. At the inn, there was only milk for 1 cup of tea. When we called for more, the girl brought us 3 drops. My friend was annoyed, who stood for the credit of an English inn, and still more the next morning, by the dog cart, sole procurable vehicle, in which we were to be sent to Wilton. I engaged the local antiquary, Mr. Brown, to go with us to Stonehenge. On our way, and show us what he knew of the astronomical and sacrificial stones. I stood on the last, and he pointed to the upright, or rather inclined stone, called the astronomical, and bade me to notice that its top ranged with the skyline. Yes, very well. Now at the summer solstice, the sun rises exactly over the top of that stone. And at the Druidical temple at Abery, there is also an astronomical stone in the same relative position. In the silence of tradition, this one relation to science becomes an important clue. but we were content to leave the problem with the rocks. Was this the giant's dance which Merlin brought from Caloris in Ireland to be Uther Pendragon's monument to the British nobles whom Hengist slaughtered here, as Geoffrey of Monmouth relates? Or was it a Roman work, as Inigo Jones explained to King James, or identical in design and style with the East Indian temples of the sun, as Davies in the Celtic Researches maintains? Of all the writers, Stukeley is the best. The heroic Antiquary, charmed with the geometric perfections of his rune, connects it with the oldest monuments and religion of the world, and with the courage of his tribe does not stick to say the deity who made the world by the scheme of Stonehenge. He finds that the cursus on Salisbury Plain stretches across the downs like a line of latitude upon the globe, and the meridian line of Stonehenge passes exactly through the middle of this cursus. But here is the high point of the theory. If the Druids had the magnet laid their courses by it, their cardinal points in Stonehenge, Ambrosbury, and elsewhere, which vary a little from true east and west, followed the variations of the compass. The Druids were Phoenicians. The name of the magnet is Lapis Heracleus, and Hercules was the god of the Phoenicians. Hercules, in the legend, drew his bow at the sun, and the sun god gave him a golden cup with which he sailed over the ocean. What was this but a compass box? This cup, or little boat, in which the magnet was made to float on water and to show the north, was probably its first form. Before it was suspended on a pin. But science was an arcanum, and as Britain was a Phoenician secret, so they kept their compass a secret, and it was lost with the Tyrian commerce. The golden fleece, again, of Jason was the compass, a bit of lodestone, easily supposed to be the only one in the world, and therefore naturally awakening the cupidity and ambition of the young heroes of a maritime nation to join in an expedition to obtain possession of this wise stone. Hence the fable that the ship Argo was loquacious and oracular. There is also some curious coincidence in the names. Apollodorus makes Magnes the son of Aeolus, who married Neus. On hints like these, Stukeley builds again the grand colonnade into historic harmony, and computing backward by the known variations of the compass, bravely assigns the year 406 before Christ for the date of the temple. For the difficulty of handling and carrying stones of this size, the like is done in all cities, every day, with no other aid than horsepower. I chanced to see a year ago men at work on the substructure of a house in Bowdoin Square in Boston, swinging a block of granite of the size of the largest of the Stonehenge columns with an ordinary derrick. The men were common masons, with paddies to help. nor did they think they were doing anything remarkable. I suppose there were as good men 1,000 years ago. We wonder how Stonehenge was built and forgotten. After spending half an hour on the spot, we set forth in our dog cart over the downs for Wilton. Carlyle, not suppressing some threats and evil omens on the proprietors for keeping these broad plains a wretched sheep walk, when so many thousands of English men were hungry and wanted labor. But I heard afterwards that it is not an economy to cultivate this land, which only yields one crop on being broken up and is then spoiled. We came to Wilton and to Wilton Hall, the renowned seat of the Earls of Pembroke, a house known to Shakespeare and Messenger, the frequent home of Sir Philip Sidney, where he wrote the Arcadia, where he conversed with Lord Brooke, a man of deep thought and a poet, who caused to be engraved on his tombstone, "Here lies Fulk Greville, Lord Brooke, the friend of Sir Philip Sidney." It is now the property of the Earl of Pembroke, and the residence of his brother, Sidney Herbert Esquire, and is esteemed a noble specimen of the English manor hall. My friend had a letter from Mr. Herbert to his housekeeper, and the house was shown. The state drawing room is a double cube, 30 feet high by 30 feet wide by 60 feet long. The adjoining room is a single cube of 30 feet every way. Although these apartments and the long library were full of good family portraits, Van Dycks and other, and though there were some good pictures and a quadrangle cloister full of antique and modern statuary, to which Carlyle, catalogue in hand, did all too much justice, yet the eye was still drawn to the windows, to a magnificent lawn, on which grew the finest cedars in England. I had not seen more charming grounds. We went out and walked over the estate. We crossed a bridge built by Inigo Jones over a stream of which the gardener did not know the name. Watched the deer, climbed to the lonely sculptured summer house on a hill backed by a wood, came down into the Italian garden and into a French pavilion garnished with French busts, and so again to the house, where we found a table laid for us with bread, meats, peaches, grapes, and wine. On leaving Wilton House, we took the coach for Salisbury. The cathedral, which was finished 600 years ago, has even a spruce and modern air, and its spire is the highest in England. I know not why, but I had been more struck with one of no fame, at Coventry, which rises 300 feet from the ground, with the lightness of a mullein plant, and not at all implicated with the church. Salisbury is now esteemed the culmination of the Gothic art in England, as the buttresses are fully unmasked and honestly detailed from the sides of the pile. The interior of the cathedral is obstructed by the organ in the middle, acting like a screen. I know not why, in real architecture, the hunger of the eye for length of line is so rarely gratified. The rule of art is that a colonnade is more beautiful the longer it is, and that ad infinitum, and the nave of a church is seldom so long that it need be divided by a screen. We loitered in the church, outside the church, whilst service was said. Whilst we listened to the organ, my friend remarked, "The music is good, and yet not quite religious, but somewhat as if a monk were panting to some fine queen of heaven." Carlyle was unwilling, and we did not ask to have the choir shown us, but returned to our inn after seeing another old church of the place. We passed in the train Clarendon Park, but could see little but the edge of a wood, though Carlyle had wished to pay closer attention to the birthplace of the decrees of Clarendon. At Bishopstoke we stopped and found Mr. H. received us in his carriage and took us to his house at Bishop's Waltham. On Sunday we had much discourse. On a very rainy day, my friends asked whether there were any Americans, any with an American idea, any theory of the right future of that country. Thus challenged, I bethought myself neither of caucuses nor Congress, neither of presidents nor of cabinet ministers, nor of such as would make of America another Europe. I thought only of the simplest and purest minds. I said, certainly yes, but those who hold it are fanatics of a dream, which I should hardly care to relate to your English ears, to which it might be only ridiculous, and yet it is the only true. So I opened the dogma of no government and non-resistance, and anticipated the objections and the fun, and procured a kind of hearing for it. I said, it is true that I have never seen in any country a man of sufficient valor to stand for this truth, and yet it is plain to me that no less valor than this can command my respect. I can easily see the bankruptcy of the vulgar musket worship, though great men be musket worshippers, and it is certain as God liveth, the gun that does not need another gun, the law of love and justice alone, can effect a clean revolution. I fancied that one or two of my anecdotes made some impression on Carlyle, and I insisted that the manifest absurdity of the view to English feasibility could make no difference to a gentleman, that as to our secure tenure of our mutton chop and spinach in London or in Boston, the soul might quote Talleyrand, Monsieur, je ne vois pas la nécessité. As I had thus taken in the conversation the saint's part, when dinner was announced, Carlyle refused to go out before me. He was altogether too wicked. I planted my back against the wall, and our host wittily rescued us from the dilemma by saying he was the wickedest and would walk out first. Then Carlyle followed, and I went last. On the way to Winchester, whither our host accompanied us in the afternoon, my friends asked many questions respecting American landscapes, forests, houses. My house, for example. It is not easy to answer these queries well. There, I thought, in America, lies nature, sleeping, overgrowing, almost conscious. Too much by half for man in the picture, and so giving a certain treatise, like the rank vegetation of swamps and forests seen at night, steeped in dews and rains, which it loves, and on it man seems not able to make much impression. There is that great Slavan continent in high Allegheny pastures, in the sea-wide, sky-skirted prairie, still sleeps and murmurs and hides the great mother, long since driven away from the trim hedgerows and over-cultivated garden of England. And in England, I am quite, too, sensible of this. Everyone is on his good behavior, and must be dressed for dinner at 6. So I put off my friends with very inadequate details as best I could. Just before entering Winchester, we stopped at the church of St. Cross, and after looking through the quaint antiquity, we demanded a piece of bread and a draught of beer, which the founder, Henry de Blois, in 1136, commanded should be given to every one who would ask it at the gate. We had both, from the old couple who take care of the church. Some 20 people every day, they said, make the same demand. This hospitality of 700 years standing did not hinder Carlyle from pronouncing a malediction on the priest who receives £2,000 a year that are meant for the poor, and spends a pittance on this small beer and crumbs. In the cathedral I was gratified, at least by the ample dimensions. The length of line exceeds that of any other English church. Being 556 feet by 250 in breadth of transept. I think I prefer this church to all I have seen except Westminster and York. Here was Canute buried, and here Alfred the Great was crowned and buried, and here the Saxon kings, and later, in his own church, William of Wykeham. It is very old, part of the crypt into which we went down and saw the Saxon and Norman arches of the old church on which the present stands. It was built 14 or 1500 years ago. Sharon Turner, in his History of the Anglo-Saxons, says, Alfred was buried at Winchester in the abbey he had founded there, but his remains were removed by Henry I to the new abbey in the meadows at Hyde, on the northern quarter of the city, and laid under the high altar. The building was destroyed at the Reformation, and what is left of Alfred's body now lies covered by modern buildings, were buried in the rooms of the old. William Wykeham's shrine tomb was unlocked for us, and Carlyle took hold of the recumbent statue's marble hands and patted them affectionately, for he rightly values the brave man who built Windsor and this cathedral and the school here and New College at Oxford. But it was growing late in the afternoon. Slowly we left the house, and, parting with our host, we took the train for London. Two more pages.